Thanks for joining us today for another APIsec University webinar. Super excited for this one. It's a topic that's very important to me, and I'm warning you, Michael. And also really pleased to have Michael Richardson from Kroger
Hello,
in
everyone.
the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from. Thought there was going to be a lot of interest in this topic, Michael. And so what we're talking about today is best practices for API discovery. This one is one we hear a lot about from folks out there, talking to companies, organizations, conferences, especially with security teams. You know, the whole notion of you can't secure what you don't know. I met Michael at API Days New York, and he and his buddy Tony did this presentation on kind of like building an inventory of APIs. And I kept waiting for him to say, and we purchased X or we deployed Y, and it magically found everything. What they did was super clever, right? So really pleased to have Michael here. He's engineering manager at Kroger. And if you're not familiar with Kroger, I'd be surprised. But in case you're not, I'm going to share a few stats here, Michael, and you can keep me honest.
Certainly.
It's got to be the largest supermarket company in the country, maybe in the world.
Largest traditional grocer in the United States, yes.
You may shop there without knowing it. 20 brands. What are some of the brands you guys operate?
Fred Meyer, Smith's, there's Baker's Plus, so it ranges from really big ones like Kroger to smaller ones. I think Harris Teeter is one of our smaller banners that we have. So
yeah, 2,800 stores, 20 brands. Kroger Corp is a top 10 e-commerce site. Think about that for a second. Over 1,000 APIs at the company, billions of API calls. They've done some really cool things. In fact, I think I've heard you say you view yourself as a tech company that sells milk and eggs. And if anyone's interested, you can even learn more. You can go check out developer.kroger.com. And you can even build your own app or your own integration. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've done that myself.
That's wild. Amazing stuff. So today we're talking about API discovery. And one of the things that gets me revved up about it, I see is someone's asking, is it silent? Can someone confirm that you can hear us? Someone just say something in the chat room, please. All right, thank you. Is this notion of API discovery? The word discovery seems kind of loaded to me, right? It sort of sounds like APIs are a mystery, right? Like you gotta follow a treasure map and find them and so forth. And a lot of times, just because a security team may not know what APIs there are or what documentation exists, doesn't mean that it's not known. So it's not so much discovery. It's about, I think it's more about collaboration. It's about communication. It's about governance. And so that's why I think it's going to be really interesting to have this conversation to learn about how you guys approached it at Kroger. And maybe just to kick things off so I can stop talking for a bit, give the audience a little bit of your background, Michael,
Certainly.
what you do over there.
So I am an engineering manager at Kroger in the API platform space, specifically working on our developer marketplace application, which is the front end for the API platform. I've been at Kroger 6-ish years now, working on a variety of things. For most of my time at Kroger, I was more on the front end side and specifically as an individual contributor, developer, tech lead. And about a little over a year ago, John Heckler courted me to come over to the API platform space, and I've been there since then. So I've ramped up on a lot of those since then, and just kind of I'm excited to tell the story of what the team has done over the course of the past few years.
Yeah, it's clearly a team effort here, and I was really impressed with what I learned about you and what the company has done. So you guys created this dev marketplace and an API catalog, but let's rewind first to talk about what were some of those challenges that you guys were running into that you were trying to solve in the first place.
Of course. So, I know you want to focus on discoverability. And I think that's a great place to look. And, some of the challenges that I remember as an API consumer were, lack of consistency and, discoverability. So, we talked a little bit about this in the API days. The easiest way to find an API, I joked that it was to go to Confluence, and then not really, because that's where knowledge goes to die. Typically, you might find 5 things in Confluence, but half of them are already gone, or the others might be out of date. One of them is up to date, but it's hard to tell for sure. As a consumer, basically what you would do is you'd go talk to another team and say, hey, what do you have? How can I access it? And they'd send you a URL, link to their Swagger docs, etc. And then you'd use that. And that was okay. It wasn't great, but it broke down when you were working across boundaries, where maybe it was a team that you hadn't interacted with a lot. And so you weren't sure who to talk to, and maybe you didn't find the right person, but you ended up building something yourself, or you used a suboptimal API, that kind of thing.
Sounds like a whole lot of friction, right?
Yes,
And
a lot of friction.
When you and I were chatting the other day, it was like sometimes people would build APIs that were already built.
Right. Oh yeah. There's a ton of duplication, and I think that happens when you get to an org the size of Kroger. That's going to happen, right? And some of it may be because different ones are fulfilling things in different ways, and so there's different use cases. But
Yep.
all definitely some of it is you call it waste, right? It's unnecessary. So
Yeah.
until you have some kind of catalog, central repository, it's going to be difficult to find the ones that are already existing.
There was that sort of reusability, like, does it already exist? Do I have to write this from scratch type of thing?
Absolutely.
But then you also mentioned consistency, right? So like, what are some examples of inconsistency that you were running into among the APIs you found?
I mean, at one point we were running some RESTful stuff and some GraphQL, and other people were using their APIs in different ways, or they, different ones would accept different arguments. Maybe you'd have to say filter or where, or different commands. And so one of the biggest things we did there to kind of start creating systems because consistency is create a style guide. And a lot of that we adopted and stole from others to start with. And then we've evolved that over time. So we're currently on version 4. Team's done a ton of great work on that. And we've also done work to create linters that will actually check your specifications to make sure that they're compliant with the style guide.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack there. And I see this
Yes.
question from Andrew. The ladder. So I'm in my mom's basement, and they don't let me out. I get a lot of questions about the ladder. And I'll leave it a mystery here. Some of the inconsistencies, like I've heard about, and I wonder if you ran into it. So things like, so we're obviously pretty keen on security things here, right? So like people implementing authentication a certain way, another team doing it a different way, how to manage authors. What about like even like deployment, like how APIs are getting published and hosted and managed? Did that like vary as well?
So luckily we did have some consistency with our hosting, because that has cost implications, right? Real costs that you can like put a finger on and say, oh, I can tell we're running this machine over there and it's costing us money. We had a lot of different ways that they were deployed, but there was typically standards around this is the way you should be doing it going forward. Is that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And what I find interesting is this thing that, maybe it didn't start as a discovery initiative, but that's what I'm going to call it. It ended up having all kinds of benefits, right? Like not just a visibility benefit, but a consistency, reusability, frankly, improved security, right? Actually having policies.
There's an API COE that community of expertise. I think it's excellence, and they come together to talk about the different problems they're having, solve common challenges, and work together to create those solutions in ways that work across the organization.
That's kind of touches on like the whys, right? Like what was happening that made you and the team come together and be like, we got to come up with a better way. And so the area I wanted to talk to you about is specifically around discoverability, but I think we're going to go well beyond that.
Hmm.
And it's so you talked about like where did you start, right? You started with Confluence, where info goes to die, and then I think the next step you described was like every organization has that one person who's just like the
Uber
go-to,
connected.
the
Yeah.
Uber connected, dev, product manager, whoever it is, that just like they just know, like, oh yeah, you make sure you talk to
Hmm.
Sheila, make sure you talk to Joe. Was that step two of your process? Was like
I think
finding
that
that
was
person?
always mixed in there. You get that in any organization. You've got the shadow org chart, right? Where it's like, oh, this person knows who to talk to.
Okay, so you got like some pointers, right? And so
Mhm.
then was this like literally like going around the dev org and the product owners and saying, hey, what you got?
It was a matter of working off of what I've learned and what I've seen happen. It was a matter of collecting those specifications. So most teams were generating specifications and publishing them as a Swagger page, right? And so you could at least get it from there. Now, then it was just a matter of, hey, let's collect all these specifications and put them in one place so that people can find them. And then they can reach out to the team if they need more information, get access, that kind of thing. I lost you for a moment. We're
All
back
right.
now.
You described that as kind of like the API catalog
Correct.
phase.
Yes.
So this was kind of like hand collected API
Yeah.
catalog.
Yeah. You have to go out to the teams and specifically have them either get it from them or have them submit it in one way or another.
Got it. So at this point you had some sort of collection of APIs, maybe
Right.
not fully complete, maybe not fully up to date, but a decent starting point. And when we were talking before, you're like, this was a significant effort and involved a lot of communication, right?
For
So
sure.
like add some color to that. What
I'm gonna have to be honest with you, Dan. I don't have a lot of insight into that, but what I can say is I know that what developed out of that, and I can give you some more
Yeah,
insight there. One of the things that's always important is you want to keep those specifications up to date, and so we developed APIs that people could submit their specifications to when they were changing them, when they deployed to production, and we also developed a GitHub action that would do the same thing. That would they put it in their pipeline, it submits that specification document, and we would update it in the catalog for them.
you built this catalog, right?
Hmm.
And I think you said you kind of threw it out there, like the version one,
Hmm.
and I think you said you went in and published it, and then it got easier. Like once it was out there, so like you just kind of had to like start somewhere, and then how did it get easier for you?
With any objective, you got to work on the evangelization, and we're continuing that to this day. Once you give people something that they can use, they're going to have more interest in the project and in the initiative. So once you get something out there, then you can start to people say, "Oh, I noticed mine is not in the catalog.
Yeah.
Let's take care of this."
Well, let me ask for folks that are joining that are maybe thinking about implementing something similar to this in their organization. I see one aspect here was just kind of like going out and finding these folks, having conversations. Did you get some support from above to help evangelize, communicate, say, hey, this is important? How did you get some greater adoption and visibility?
There's always the carrot and the stick, right? And you need to use a little both to have an effective operation. So definitely there was a kind of an org wide, like, we need to get your API in the catalog, um, you know, and please make this happen. So it was definitely kind of a mandate out there to get
Yeah.
that done. And then we've started to implement over the time, hey, if you want to do this thing, your API needs to be in the catalog to do that,
Yeah.
whether that's gateway routing or things like that.
Yeah, and I'm seeing some interesting questions in the chat
Mhm.
from Jay and Diana. Jay says, "Did you purchase a catalog or build?" And I remember asking you that same question back in New York. So how did you guys go about building this?
So the site is been built on Gatsby to start with a backing database. That's where we are right now. It's basically just generating those pages for each of the APIs that we have registered.
Did you purchase the catalog?
Oh, no. Yes.
Or
So no,
build
we
something?
built something ourselves. And then, but of course, relying on some of the open source components. So for example, using Redoc to display that OAS document. And then we recently rolled out a feature internally so that you can choose whether you want to view that document as Redoc or as Swagger.
You kind of built your own using various
Some
tools.
components, bringing various components together.
Can you provide more details on API inventory / catalog? Do you have an API catalog inventory template to share, and so forth? Any details that you can elaborate on kind of like what you are looking to collect here for an inventory?
There is a standard, and from what I've seen, most people use it for API documentation, and that's OAS, the Open API Specification. And so basically, we just take in OAS documents and we can list those out. There are certain requirements, and we've added to those requirements over time. So at first, we didn't have even the capability really to tag an owner. And so now that we've developed out the system, we have RBAC controls and more kind of your user specific capabilities within the platform.
Yeah.
We are tagging owners to each of those APIs, so those owners can control those APIs, add more data, that kind of thing.
You actually built some code that you rolled out to folks to help you improve the freshness, I guess, of the documentation. So whenever there's a new push, so how did you guys go about that? Like, what were you trying to accomplish? What did you end up implementing?
Certainly. So with any API documentation, it's only as good as how fresh it is. If the API has changed underneath and the documentation has not been updated, then you're kind of aiming for the wrong thing. So, excuse me. We created a GitHub action that each team puts in their pipeline with their deployment that submits that specification document to our documentation service each time they deploy to production. It's from what I understand, the code in the action is not super complicated.
So now, like from the mindset of the developer creating these different APIs, like what's in it for them? Like, how did you make this a win for folks creating?
One of the big things is just the ease of consumers finding the application, right? And then their ease of integration. So if you are putting out your specification documents, you're giving details about how to access your APIs, then you're going to have to engage potentially less with the people who are consuming them because you've got valid documentation out there that's consistent and easily discoverable. So that makes that interaction easier. We're also, as we work along, exposing more data to the owners of these APIs in more convenient ways around like who's consuming your APIs and how are scopes related to your APIs, that kind of thing.
Interesting. So for the developers, they get feedback, they get visibility, metrics, usage, adoption, that kind of thing.
We got a whole roadmap of ideas that we want to create to provide value to both producers and consumers.
Yeah, and I imagine as a developer, a creator, you want your stuff to get used, right? And so now the stuff that I'm creating is discoverable by others. It's reusable.
Not just as a developer, but as a member of a business, you are oftentimes kind of judged on whether the stuff that you create is being used. So we use OKRs at Kroger, and some of those OKRs are going to be based on consumers and how much the API is work the API is doing, whether it's producing revenue, those kind of things. So by allowing people to discover it, you're helping out your team and helping to accomplish business objectives along the way.
And I think, you talk about culture and a cultural shift that you had to go through. And I think one of the things that I find interesting is this concept of APIs as products. And I think in a lot of orgs, APIs are kind of like a byproduct. It's just something that you have to do alongside the thing you're actually trying to do. But that's not your approach here, right? So you have this cultural view of APIs. Can you sort of share what that looks like?
Absolutely. So, again, a lot of people working on this. It's been a really awesome initiative, but it's about an API first methodology where, you know, I mentioned before, some of the duplication that you would see would be, well, this API doesn't quite fit my use case, so we need a different one that works with the data in a slightly different way. We encourage teams to develop their contract, develop their specification in such a way that it will make their API more reusable by kind of adhering to the standards that create kind of a more general purpose API, and then making it an evolvable API so that they can add more, functionality as the API grows.
Well, and that makes me think about like how do you upskill or educate that community on API documentation and like do you have like training? Do you have people who help actually develop and write the API documentation? How do you make sure
Absolutely.
you're getting quality there?
So we have technical writers on the team. We've written a lot of documentation. We also have a specific API first training that we have rolled out in our learning management system. Developers and I've taken that. It's really great. Helps developers to understand kind of the objectives and benefits of adoption.
Before I'm going to start, we have a whole lot of questions here. Is governance, right? You're exposing to the outside world,
Correct.
internal partner APIs, and so how do you manage access and who gets to see what do they get to do with it? Like, what does that process look like?
You take a second to answer that question. So there's obviously security access controls, controlling it via OAuth and other ways who can see various things and who can access APIs. You're thinking about is a data sharing governance council.
Yeah.
It's a centralized body that requests to expose APIs to either partners or to the public, however that works, and create a consistent process for doing that. It's
Yeah.
not fun. It's not an easy process, but it's better than not having a consistent process.
From all of this conversation is a thoughtfulness that you guys and run an API program. You created the marketplace. You provide training. You provide assistance on documentation. You have this governance team, right? Because I can imagine in other organizations, like if new partner X needs access to some API, it's like okay, wait for some approval process that takes months to happen, and
Right.
meanwhile the business is not happening. But you guys thought ahead. You're like, this is something we're going to need to be able to support, right? We're going to need a mechanism to review these requests and make decisions in an efficient way and grant access where it should and not where
Absolutely.
it should. And I think that's why like we talk a lot about the 3 pillars of API security. There's always like a rush to like, let's just start testing stuff. Let's start monitoring. Let's start plugging stuff into the network. But really, you should take a step back and start thinking about the whole big picture and how you're going to build long-lasting value and security.
The real win is when you start to change the culture around the philosophy of what you're building and focusing on creating highly usable and accessible.
Let's jump into some of these questions. All right, here's one from Timothy. This topic of how do you make sure that documentation is conforming? That you can create a standard all you like, but are people actually adopting it and using it?
So there are some things that you can check for in an automated process and others that you can't. And for the things that we are able to automate the checking, our linting application will do that. We've developed an in-house linter, and then we evolved that into a live linter so that you can actually drop in your specification and make edits on the fly to that, and it'll automatically update with how you are performing against various rule sets. So our API enablement team has done amazing work on that so that you can check it against the basic rule set and the V3 API rule set, and tell me if there's any errors in that. And then there's other stuff can't really be automated in an easy manner, and so it just needs that personal touch of people looking at it.
You went and built your own linter. There are tools, technologies out there, but the main point is like, how do you ensure conformity? Like, employ technology, right? Like, have tools that will actually verify and let you know, right?
Yeah, we want to create that really seamless developer experience.
We get a lot of questions around versioning. It's OS number 9, which is inventory management, right? Did you sit around and make policies around like when to increment a version, when to retire, how to retire, communication? Like, what are your thoughts there?
There definitely are standards around that, and on the tooling side, that's something we're still solving in various ways. We've got a lot of stuff kind of in the background cooking that we're excited to get working on and roll out. Definitely on the catalog side right now, what you do is you submit your API with a version, and that we collect those versions, and you can also compare between versions. So let's say I have developed against version 2.1 of the spec, and the current version is 2.4. I can do a what's changed between 2.1 and 2.4, so I know if they've added any options or deprecated certain things along the way.
People ask a lot about zombie APIs and rogue API, shadow APIs, older versions of APIs that stick around when they shouldn't. How do you guys think about that, and how do you go about dealing with it?
I can effectively speak to that. That's something that we have been thinking and talking about that life cycle. There may be other parts of the API platform that have done more work on that. It's something we're still working through.
Like having APIs out there that are not following a process or not being managed, to me that reeks of governance gap or a governance issue. And you mentioned early on, like, you have standard ways for deployment of APIs.
Like you said, not knowing it's out there is a problem. So we really discourage people from removing anything from the catalog if it's really ever been used and it's still out there. And we're thinking through ways to kind of denote, okay, this is deprecated or this is actually sunset. It did exist, but it no longer does.
Having a full life cycle, well-defined process is a pretty good starting point, right? And then going and flushing out those things that aren't following the process.
For sure.
I'm not surprised people interested in that GitHub action that you created.
Okay.
So yeah, what is it doing? How's it triggered? What were you looking for there?
So it's triggered like any action. You put it in there. It's explicitly added, and then you give it a path to your specification file, and then it submits that file to our documentation service.
Yeah, super cool. Here's one from Jay. Do you have visibility into the life cycle of the API? What's in dev versus QA versus prod?
We're doing some work on this. That's it. We've already been doing some discovery on this idea. We haven't really rolled that out yet, but I think we've got some good stuff coming there.
And I don't want this to be 20 questions about Kroger. This is, learn from the really one of the leading organizations out there. There's a question here about third-party API, and a whole lot of talk about risks, third-party risk exposure. We've got all kinds of new regulations, the SEC breach ruling, and you've got things like PCI and so forth. Does your group think about third-party APIs? Are you inventorying those? Are you capturing how they're being used? Who's using them?
Are you referring to the ones that are called by Kroger?
Yeah,
not an area where we have a ton of insight right now. Our goal is really to connect our focus, and that's one of the things is there's a lot of things that we want to do. my PM James, he's fantastic about this. We've got great product managers at in the API platform, and there's a ton of problems we want to solve, but we have to be laser focused on solving the most important problems right now. So there's a lot of things that we want to do that we just can't get to until we solve the more important things that we need in place for our developers. Our focus is on internal API producers and connecting to the consumers that consume those APIs, whether they're internal, external, partner, etc.
Yeah, and if anyone's interested to see what that looks like, you can go right over to developer.kroger.com. I think you can create your own account. It's pretty
Absolutely.
awesome stuff. You even put like experimental APIs, right?
It's something we're trying out. That they're just mock APIs, but it's discovering whether people have an interest in those.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate your comment about prioritizing, right? Like there are orgs that are like, we got to find every last API. Until we do, like, we don't have our hands on it. And in the meantime, like, what are you doing to actually protect the API? If you're, a fintech, health tech, any kind of SaaS, like there are meat and potato APIs that are running your front end, your mobile apps, right? Like get on top of those, like right now,
Right.
Yes, go find all the others that exist, right? But you need to start protecting these APIs. You have to finding and plugging the vulnerabilities that exist. Is if you've attended any of my prior webinars, like these things are getting attacked. APIs are on the radar for attackers. They are finding all kinds of logic gaps, authorization gaps, flaws, and that exist in the API that can't be exploited through the UI. And they're just waiting to find them, right? And when they find them, they go straight to exploit.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to keep you all day here. I think we could go for another hour or two here. I do want to share with the group some stuff that we've got coming up. There's Michael and a much younger, thinner version of me. We talked about that. Our next webinar is 4 weeks from today. We're going to have Ads Dawson, really amazing guy who has actually been part of the brand new OWASP top 10 for LLM security. So this is going to be a really fun new topic. You can sign up already, and we'll put the link in here shortly. Or you can just go to APIsecU.com. You'll see it right at the top of the page. So if you're interested in all this AI and LLM and NLP security and what does that mean for APIs, please come join us in a month from now. And for those of you that happen to be in France, we're actually launching APIsecCon, which is super exciting. We're partnered up with the Appy Days folks. So if you want to come join us in Paris in December, I'd love to see you there. You can learn all about it. We've got an incredible group of folks, including the cybersecurity woman of the world, Confidence Davely going to be there. Corey's going to be there. All kinds of great stuff. And of course, we're always pushing new content out at APIsecU. We're north of 60,000 students now, 75% of the Fortune 100. You're probably familiar with our pen test course, fundamentals, OWASP, fantastic course on PCI compliance, if I dare say so. If you're subject to PCI, there's a whole new regulation that you have to comply with by March. And it has a lot to say about APIs. Fantastic documentation course by Jason Harmon from Stoplight. And we got some other cool ones. There's one that's actually not listed here, Securing API Servers. This is a highly, highly recommended one. You need to learn about error handling, rate limiting, cores, info leakage, that sort of thing. That's all in that course. Connected cars, and we got a bunch of cool stuff coming. Michael, really appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for being so generous with your experience and your expertise, answering all these questions. I wish we could get to more of them, but hopefully we'll your arm and get you back on a future call. If you're in the Cincinnati area, Michael runs an API security meetup. He's also involved with the Momentum Developer Conference. Did I get that
That's right. Yeah, Momentum Developer Conference.
Just held it. Huge success. So not just Cincinnati, but Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana region. Be sure to check it out. Momentum DevCon, fantastic event. And thanks everyone for joining us from all around the world. Really appreciate you taking 45 minutes of your day to come join us. We'll post this online, and hopefully we'll see you on the LLM webinar in a month from now. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, Dan.